Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Welcome to True Crimecast Bonus Edition. That's what I'm going to call it.
There we go.
Got a bonus episode for you all. Jamie, you wrote this. You felt very strongly about a situation that's very, very recent. It's happening right now, and it's really too late to do anything, right?
It is, but I just felt very strongly that we needed to talk about this. I know our bonus episodes usually bring on guests, and we certainly have some of those lined up, but this was more timely, I think, and I think it needs to be, if in case people aren't aware of it, this story needs to be spread so that something can be done about it. I fully believe that the state of Missouri on last Tuesday executed an innocent man. Now, if you want to argue he wasn't innocent, have at it. There was some circumstantial evidence, and we're going to get into those things, some bad witnesses. But there's some DNA evidence that came out in the last, well, it started several years ago, but even in the last couple months that I think put so much doubt into this case. And they proceeded to execute him with a lethal injection. And it is getting a lot of attention, but something has to change with our corporal punishment system. And this is a story that needs to be told. I don't know that it's going to go as long as a normal episode. I don't know that we're going to dig into all the details. This is more of us feeling like, or me feeling like we need to talk about this and putting something together, kind of an outline to guide us. So right. I don't know. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. Why don't you get the ball rolling? Talk about what led us here today.
Yeah. The crime happened in 1998 on August 11th. There was a lady named Felicia Gayle, and she was a former post dispatcher in St. Louis. She was found murdered in her home, and it was a brutal crime. She had been stabbed 43 times. Pretty quickly, a man named Marcellus Williams was arrested, and in 2001, he was convicted of this crime and sentenced to death. Like I said, there were serious doubts in the case. He had his execution date set several times, but last Tuesday, they carried through with it. After years being in prison, DNA testing showed that there was no trace of Williams on the murder weapon. They didn't find any DNA at the scene, which just cast further doubt into an already shaky case. The Missouri Supreme Court denied an appeal to halt the execution. The governor stepped in and refused to stop the execution. And it was originally scheduled for August of 2017, but it happened on September 24th of 2024, where I believe that Missouri murdered an innocent man.
The case against Williams was largely based on the testimonies of two informants. So one of those was his ex-girlfriend, and the other was a former cellmate of his. And both claimed that he confessed to them that he murdered this woman. But both of these people had also motives to testify because they were offered a reduced sentence or benefits. So you testify against this guy and we're going to give you a deal that maybe gets you out of prison a little sooner. But like you said, the DNA evidence was finally tested after years from following the trial, which showed that another man's DNA was present on the knife and none of his DNA was found at all. So this evidence should have raised new questions about the validity of this conviction, but it didn't. Despite these findings, the court maintained that there was still sufficient evidence to uphold the conviction.
Even if there was, and I don't think there is, and again, we'll get more into this, I don't know about upholding the sentence. That's something that could be retroactively changed as well. Back in 2017, the Missouri governor at the time, Eric Grittens, did issue a stay of education just hours before that initial execution had been scheduled. He appointed a special board of inquiry to review the new DNA evidence and to re-examine the case to ensure that the conviction would hold up and that there should be no changes to the sentence. Advocates came forward to help out on this. The Innocence Project got involved, and we bring them up occasionally. There's been some talk of an Innocence Project getting involved in Scott Peterson's case. I don't think that's the same group. I think they're using a similar name, but the Innocence Project doesn't take up a lot of cases that they don't feel strongly about because they get so many requests. So they felt strongly about this one, and they argued that another person's DNA should be enough to at the very least, warrant a new trial. But again, the Missouri Supreme Court refused to halt the execution and said it should move forward without any further consideration.
Prosecutors argue that the DNA results don't necessarily completely clear Williams. They contend that the other circumstantial evidence, including the informant testimonies, ties him to the murder. They also pointed out that stolen items from Gayle's home were found in a car that was linked to Williams. But for Williams' supporters, the DNA evidence is key. How could this man have welded a murder weapon without leaving any kind of trace of his own DNA? So this really leads to a broader concern about the use of informants, especially when their testimonies come with incentives.
And we talk about that all the time. And allegedly they're supposed to talk about on the stand how they are given incentives if they are to receive that. But how often and how clear is that made to jurors? I don't know. That state-appointed board of inquiry was ultimately responsible for putting forth a recommendation about whether or not his sentence could be commuted, whether there should be a new trial or whatever, but the outcome just kind of dissipated. There was no formal recommendation that came out of this group, and there was no recommendation for the additional DNA evidence. DNA evidence right now is like the key, right? That's the one thing that everybody says is definite. I think we continue to advance scientifically. DNA evidence has already exonerated a lot of different people. In the case of Marcellus Williams being executed gives us some very uncomfortable questions about the death penalty. That's something that can't be brought back. You can't ring that bell. We see all the time people who are imprisoned and then exonerated, and the state will pay them money, the federal government will pay them money or whatever, doesn't give their life back, but you can't at least let them out of prison. And I think that helps people sleep at night. Marcellus Williams is deceased and no longer with us. And there's nothing that can undo that, no matter what information we find out moving forward.
One of the most troubling aspects of this case is the role that the informants played in his conviction. So this decision to proceed with the execution of Williams, despite concerns about the DNA evidence, has led to renewed debates about the use of the death penalty. His legal team argued that modern forensic technology, like the DNA evidence that excluded him, should have been enough to prevent the execution. Yet prosecutors pointed to other incriminating factors, such as his possession of the items belonging to Gayle and the testimony that placed him at the scene of the crime. So, Jamie, I mean, for me personally, if you are found guilty of my murder only because you have some of my stuff in your car, look, did you steal them from me? Did you steal them from someone who may have murdered me? You having my stuff does not necessarily mean that you're the one responsible for my murder. I get it. It doesn't look good, and it would make me think there's a really strong probability that you are responsible. But if there's a crime scene at my death, at my murder, and your DNA is not there and someone else's is, that should be enough to make you think maybe there's more to this story.
Right. And I mean, we've been doing this for 7 years. We know eyewitness testimony is crap. We know it through seeing it overturned in several cases. We know it through studies being done to show that our minds are really, really dumb in recalling what we see. So even if they are being honest here to say he confessed, well, maybe I misheard it, maybe whatever, like it's not good, especially when it's the linchpin of a case. So having that primarily is not great. We have discussed at length our opinions of the death penalty. It's been a few years. I think we both ended up on the don't really like it side of things. There have also been cases where we're like, I'm not mad about it. But ultimately, it is final. It is the ultimate finality of a case. And is it necessary? How many people are we executing nowadays? I feel like it's a handful a year, something like that.
Yeah, I would say it's got to be less than 10 or so.
So is the amount of money we're saving by not having them in the prison system worth the risk of putting somebody to death? This was a brutal scene. It really hurt the community. She was a journalist and a dispatcher. She was known for her charity work. Gayle was found dead in her home, and the crime scene was absolutely brutal. There was hair everywhere. There was blood everywhere. They didn't find a single piece of Marcellus Williams' DNA. So did you get that number for executions?
Yeah, in 2023, 24 people were executed, and that's a 33% increase from 2022 when only 18 people were executed.
So 20-ish less. I still don't think the money saved, because that's part of it. It's like we don't want our prison system to get run down, right?
But also think about, the appeal process for the death penalty versus the appeal process for life in prison. That's going to save you money, right? I mean, taxpayer dollars will cover all of those appeals. I don't think it's an argument we should be making for someone's life.
Yeah, and people do. So we're bringing it up only because that argument is made, not because we believe that it is valid. But people make that argument that it costs the government too much money to keep people in prison when they can't be rehabilitated, when they've done something so horribly violent. In the last couple months, we have had a return of this DNA evidence, John. We know whose DNA was on that knife now.
Okay.
It was the person who collected the knife at the scene. They didn't have that in 2017. They knew that it was not Marcellus Williams, but they didn't know who it was. Now we know that it was another police officer who there's no reason to think they did the murder, but it goes from, hey, we have a DNA of potential killer, let's wait and find that person, that's reasonable doubt, to, in my mind, this was handled sloppily. Like, they're not using gloves at the crime scene, and he didn't. That's why his DNA got on it. Also calls the evidence into question, right?
Well, at the end of the day, his DNA was not collected or found or determined to be there. So I cannot definitively say he was there. Did he commit the murder? There's reasonable doubt. So why put my name on it and be the one responsible for his execution if I cannot say with 100% airtight certainty he did it?
Right. I am personally against the death penalty for a number of reasons, logical, spiritual, morally, what have you. But I think if you're going to do it, it has to be an absolute, like, you have to have witnesses and circumstantial evidence and DNA and a confession and maybe a videotape. Like, it needs to be.
I'm going to take it a step further and say, I also need that to find you guilty of murder.
There you go. Yeah.
If whether I die in prison or am executed in prison, you've taken my life away for something that I may or may not have done. So let's have it that airtight, even to convict somebody.
I was called for jury duty a couple weeks ago, and in the process of screening jurors, I wasn't selected. But the judge went over that in this particular case, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I assume that he made some further definitions to the jurors that were selected. He made the distinction that preponderance of evidence is, in a civil case, is like more likely than not. But how do we define reasonable doubt? And do jurors really understand that? You and I talked about this on our other show, Bless Their Hearts, but we literally pick people from all walks of life and ask them to go in and be interpreters of the law and actions. I don't love it. I mean, we talked to Brett and Alice of the prosecutors one week about it. They think it's the right system, and it may be. There may not be a better one. But in order to, like, for me, to go in, understand the law well enough, understand the reasoning behind reasonable doubt, to go in and make this determination that could lead to somebody being killed, or could just lead to somebody being convicted when the killer's still out there, it's not sitting well with me right now.
And you better believe if I am this person's defense attorney, my closing statements are going to be just that. To help you understand as a juror that if there is any reasonable doubt, then the answer is not guilty. Even if you're 95% sure, but there's 5% of doubt, you're convicting a man that may not be responsible. And, I don't want to be viewed as someone who is too lenient or wanting to let criminals free. No, if you did a crime, I want you held accountable. I don't want to hold accountable the wrong person because that's also not justice.
Completely agree. It turns out that Williams is the 15th individual executed on death row in the country this year, and the third one that has come out of the state of Missouri. Now their governor is Mike Parsons, and he came forward with a statement and said that there is not enough evidence to say that he did not commit this crime, or not enough to reasonably call it into question. The individuals of the Supreme Court would say that, and this is a quote, "There's no basis for the court to find that Williams is innocent, and no court has made such a finding. Williams is guilty of first-degree murder and has been sentenced to death." They would say that anyone that is defending Mr. Williams is doing so without actually knowing what's going on. They reiterated that there was no court at any level that found any merit in his innocence. However, as we know, this is fallible. We see it happening all the time with convictions being overturned. John, the prosecutor's office at the local level was advocating for a stay of execution so they could look into this further. Now, some of that is they may not have wanted the blood on their hands, but maybe they also just want to find the real killer, right? Gayle's family was advocating for him to not be killed. We see that sometimes, and people that are just anti-death penalty, they're looking to forgive, but they also want justice for their loved one, and they don't feel like justice was at the hands of Marcellus Williams. But he's gone. Like, I can't say it enough. I did see a lot of people. There was a countdown online. People were sharing it. There was a petition. Last time I looked at it, it had like 600,000 signatures. I would guess it got close to 1 million by the time of the execution, but nobody seemed to care. My critical mind would say, you know what, there's probably stuff I don't know. And that may be the case, right? I don't have the whole file, all the information, but what I do know is the DNA wasn't his. The viability of eyewitness testimony is garbage, and there is reasonable doubt here. And the DNA evidence, whether it was had come back as a different person who could be the killer, or showed that the police didn't do the crime scene well, that's enough to reopen it, in my opinion. Like, that should be enough in any conviction, let alone putting somebody to death.
I completely agree. I feel like this case deserved a second trial, and I know that if I was the governor, I would not sign off on this, because that's blood on my hands if I got it wrong.
Absolutely. And this is blood on a lot of people's hands. There are a lot of people that had the opportunity to step in and stop this, and they didn't. So an individual that was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, I don't think by any logical person that looks at the information that's available, was put to death. And there's nothing we can do to reverse that. I'm not hopeful. I don't know that it's going to change. I really wish and plead that we fix this so it doesn't happen again. And I guess that's the only place to go from here, is to change it so other people don't fall victim to the same problems in our system.
I think I read that 29 states so far have said they're not going to do executions anymore. So, I would say, why not? Why not just ban it? Because I don't know. At the same time, there are some cases we've covered where I'm like, yes, it is appropriate. Let's do it. So I don't know. I don't know what we need to do to fix it. I don't know what can be done, but certainly if there are doubts, don't move forward. That seems elementary.
As a society, I think less than 20 people a year are being executed in the criminal justice system. I can better live knowing that Ted Bundy rots in prison than knowing that somebody like Marcellus Williams was put to death. If I had to choose one or the other, I would say just keep them all alive. Let Ted Bundy rot in prison. Let other people like him, as opposed to killing potentially innocent people. I think if you're going to, I always talk to my kids about risk and reward, and if you're going to make an error, do it on the side of caution. I think the error here was made in the side of punitive justice, which was irrationally and immorally applied. I know I usually don't get super emotional, but this one has had me super worked up. So we wanted to share that on today's bonus episode. We'd love to have your feedback. If there's any way we can get involved with petitions, letters, anything to get some of these things changed that you're aware of, let us know.
Jamie, appreciate you, being so interested in this one that you took the time to write it up and research it. And hopefully moving forward, our country will do a much better job of taking these kinds of thoughts into consideration.
And we usually don't do this piece of doing something so urgently. Obviously, there's a lot more detail here that I honestly wasn't able to research, but we wanted to put this out as quickly as we could. So this is the information we have available. If more becomes available, we can certainly share that. Although I'm sure there are documents upon documents you can read about it. But this is an episode not about storytelling, not about entertainment. This is about awareness and advocacy for justice, which was not carried out here. So we appreciate you guys. We'll be back with a normal episode on Tuesday as usual, but this has been our bonus episode for today. So thanks for joining us. And until next crime, this has been True Crime Cast.
You've listened to True Crime Cast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.